welcome. My name's Lacey Leone McLaughlin, and I am thrilled to be wrapping up day 2 with this exciting panel, CHRO Insights, Facing the Truth About Transformational Change. Today, I'm joined by 4 great panelists: Mandy, Head of HR for Human Resources at Shutterfly; Robyn, the SVP and CHRO of CommScope; Eva, co-chair, Women Corporate Directors in the Bay Area and former C-suite executive; and Padma, former CHRO, CPO of Takeda Pharmaceuticals, Lego, and many others. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So I love to start these conversations with stories. So that's what I'm going to ask for from each of you today. Let's hear a story about when you were leading or driving transformational change in your organization. Tell us about the project, tell us about the role, and what was most impactful for that experience for you. Let's start with Mandy.
Okay. Thank you, Lacey. So yeah, when I was thinking about the different stories that I can tell, the one that kind of popped to mind, I guess, as the most memorable it's been quite a long time, but it takes me back to my last role at Pepsi. I was at Pepsi for about 7 years earlier in my career, so going back about 10 years ago here. Was leading the HR organization for the beverages division on the West Coast of the country. So we were about $1.5 billion in revenue. And most of my career, I have really been picked to go fix things. So I have kind of made a career out of being the fixer-upper. And this was definitely that type of situation. They were very upfront with me about coming into this role. The business was, while we had $1.5 billion in revenue, the profitability had been shrinking year over year over year. And so there was a new vice president general manager. He needed to bring in a new leadership team. And so they brought me over from, I had been in Dallas, Texas before that. And you know, we absolutely transformed that business, I would say, from top to bottom. First, putting an entirely new leadership team in place. We had to reorg or redesign the organization, very regionally focused type business. And we had to parse things out much differently. I had to upgrade almost my entire HR team at the time, or probably about 70% of it. We had to do pay changes for frontline employees. There was so much heavy lifting in that role. But in the end, after about 2 years of really having a people first focus, and that became kind of our mantra as we went out and talked to the organization about these changes that needed to be made, focused on high potential development, focused on putting the right people in the right roles, at the right time. We were able to transform that business. And so the financial hardship that the business had gone through, literally being in the red, we turned those numbers into black after 2 years. It was a very long journey. There was a lot of pain and kind of suffering along the way, a lot of long hours and a lot of travel. But we were able to get that team fully engaged and turn things around in the way that we had been asked to do. So huge transformation, very proud of that success, and the legacy lives on with the people that I still know that are in that business and in that region. So that's
Amazing.
my story.
Amazing, amazing. Padma, jump in.
Okay, like Mandy, let me take myself back many, many, many years. This was at Pfizer. So I joined at a time when Pfizer was completely reorganizing itself, right from functional structure to therapeutic areas. And lo and behold, they wanted to start with oncology, the most scientific area. And I joined the company as the head of HR for oncology, a business unit that didn't exist. And I was asked to put this business unit together and had to think about this, because when a company operates and its tentacles are around the world in various parts of the, various functions operate differently in different parts of the world. And you just cannot sit and put an org structure and say, hey, this is the headcount that I want. This is how it works. Because when you touch the market, the go-to-market's very different. The call point strategy in sales is very different. When you think about your product and you're developing your product, I'm going to talk a little bit of science. The product that you develop for cardiology versus pain versus oncology is very different. So you just don't have a prototype, but you also want to differentiate yourselves with your competitors. So what we actually did was pull in all the senior executives of the company to clearly articulate the vision. And we went from that to deliverables because we knew we needed to operationalize a business unit. And with the deliverables following, we said, what are the measurable success factors? So this is what the senior executive team of complete Pfizer would be responsible for the transformation. Because if this works, this was going to be a prototype that they were going to use to create other business units. So once we did that, we actually pulled in 850 different colleagues from different parts of the organization in different functions together, and we categorized them into 6 main segments. And those segments are typically like, you could think about sales, medical affairs. One of them was talent. And we actually asked them to value stream map where they think the organization should be and how it should be operating. It had nothing to do with org structure. How should it operate? Every value stream map had a definition, and they had to define current state versus future state. And lo and behold, when we looked at current state, different parts of the world had different ways of doing things. And then once we did this, this was approved by the senior executive team, and we actually did a Pareto of key things that we needed to operationalize, and we put leaders in to really bring this to life with improvement initiatives. On the other side, we actually did a capability analysis to say, what are the capabilities we need to operationalize this? That translated into skills. We talk about skills and skill-based structures. So we actually did an org structure. We evaluated talent. And this was probably the first time Pfizer went out with an executive team for a business unit with less than 50% named into the executive role, because we really didn't have the skills that we needed. And we operationalized the business unit. So a lot of work along the way. There was a lot that we needed to do, from competency-based structure, selection process. How do you the selection process was an awesome opportunity when we built in our talent structure and how do you develop bench and introduce diversity. But what this resulted in is a complete different way drug was developed. Completely different way the sales organization was structured, and how the assets or the compounds in the pipeline was even looked at. And Pfizer at that point was the top 25 in the world in oncology, being the largest pharmaceutical company. In 3 years, it was among the top 3, and it still stays among the top 3. So it's not about achieving it, but it is about sustaining it beyond, people. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Eva, let's go to you.
Well, thank you. It's great to see everybody and those dialed in. I'm going to talk about skills for America's future and take you back a little bit to the last economic crisis, 2008, 2009. At the time, I was the chief HR officer for Gap Inc. Like Mandy, I worked at PepsiCo for almost a decade, loved it, and I'd been at Disney Consumer Products, Sun Microsystems, and Xerox in my early days in tech. And so we all remember, for those of us that were in leadership roles back then, the incredible unemployment rates. We remember the crisis that the economy was in. We got a call at the HR Policy Association from the White House. They said, we're looking for 6 leaders who particularly work with frontline workers and communities and families to see what we could do to make a difference. I was one of the 6 companies. I leaned in. Long story short, we ended up as a coalition of chief HR officers, launching and creating in partnership with the Commerce Department, Penny Pritzker, President Barack Obama, Skills for America's Future, which was housed at the Aspen Institute and the Economic Opportunities Group. The reason I'm so excited about that and why to this day it's one of the things I'm most proud of is that we did see our way through a difficult economic time, but just like the pandemic, in times of crisis, there's a chance to do coalition work above and beyond our really great internal CHRO work. And we talked, Lacey, in some of the other sessions about collaboration, cooperation, but also innovation and creativity. So that Skills for America's Future became such a passion for me that when Penny Pritzker became Commerce Secretary, I was vice chair. And I worked with Nick Pinchuk, who is the CEO of Snap-on Tools. And we co-led that for about 7 years. Those 5 or 6 companies on the White House lawn in 2010 that included Accenture, McDonald's, Gap Inc., United Technologies are now 19,000 partners. And it grew, and I love the word legacy that, you know, Padma, you talked about to this day. It became Upskill America. So it was embraced across multiple administrations, which is not always a given. And I'm so excited because in my most recent role at Accenture, I got to see the effect of what we call work-based credentialing, academic opportunity. I got to inspire early founders like Rachel Romer Carlson, who founded Guild. Last night, I went to a dinner called Up Limit with a female CEO, and this whole area of skills credentialing, credentials of technology enablement is one of the most explosive growth areas for global competitiveness. I could go on and on, Lacey, but the results have been extraordinary, and it's led to coalitions, and I'll just mention a couple, where while at Accenture, I had the privilege of working with Joe Fuller at Harvard Business School, and we researched and funded the Hidden Worker Project. So, Mandy, you remember at PepsiCo, we worked with lots of diverse employees. I had 31 bottling plants in Pepsi West, with route drivers and merchandisers and third shift forklift drivers. Well, the whole piece of work that Joe and I did with our teams was that there are 24 to 70 million Americans underemployed who have skills aspirations, credentials aspirations, but may not have a 4-year college degree. And so the idea of converting what used to be surrogates for certain levels of competency into skills visibility. At Sky High, they call it your skills passport. And then working with other leaders so that people can be digitally visible and discoverable using artificial intelligence to transfer industries or progress in your company or transfer into new opportunities. So this idea of stepping above my day job, which is Gap Inc., and stepping into the chair or vice chair of Skills for America's Future, increasing and improving the global economic competitiveness. It actually led me to a brand new world for me, where I was so in love with it. I moved on to form my own company, and I still work on skills acquisition and economic opportunity. One last results point, IBM and Accenture reviewed all our job descriptions and have released any roles that don't require a 4-year degree. So many of the graduates coming out of these skill-based programs are now candidates, both inside and outside the company, for jobs that would never have been available to them 10 years ago. So that's what I did. It was hard. I haven't mentioned any of the challenges. I'll save that for later, Lacey, but I look at my colleagues on the screen here, and I'm so proud to be a member of the CHRO, sort of life change, community change network.
Yeah. Amazing. Another great story. Robyn, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you. And these are great stories, but I got to go with my my colleague here, Eva. I went right to 2007 for me, right? I was the CHRO of the 6th largest home builder in the US. So high production home builds all over the country, and the rest of the world and the rest of the US is humming along nicely. And the housing market collapsed about a year before the financial markets and all of that. And so the net of it, and it's a long story. I don't usually share it because I start to sweat. was we went from 6 billion in revenue to 1 billion in revenue, from 7,500 employees to 1,500 employees, and it was about saving the company because there are a lot of great companies that aren't here anymore. It's about timing and transformation. And so it was a really fascinating time and terrifying time because I was my first CHRO role, and you realize that you can't look up. You know, you're the expert and you got to drive and lead the way. And so there are a lot of stories within the stories there, but it's about surviving. The company didn't make a profit for 4.5 years. Thankfully, we had, money in the bank that we could leverage, to survive. Again, over time, we didn't shrink overnight. As we sold houses, we didn't buy new land and build new houses on that new land. We just waited until things bottomed out. But it was an opportunity to change the way we do business completely. And again, to get into the details, a lot of businesses, you might be, part of a holding company. We had lots of home builders that we bought, and we let everybody run their businesses the way they'd run it when we acquired them. And then the day came when that no longer was going to be viable. So I don't need 26 architecture departments in 26 different divisions. I need one. I need one big service. The CEO and CFO were working on restructuring debt, working in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. I became the communications. How do you rally people around the fact that, they're going to build homes again? We need more homes in America or wherever. And so understanding clearly what your role is, and then, playing that role out. There's lots more, I think, that I could share, but I would say I draw on some of the biggest lessons from that experience. The company survived, and the housing market, I won't say has ever thrived in the last, 15 years to my view, but, obviously growing and producing and doing well. But I learned how to do amazing things with no money. And many of us just come to rely on the fact that you have resources, whether it's capital or people or what have you. And it is amazing when your back's against the wall and you realize there is no money. It forces you to think differently and creatively. And I can tell you that I've deployed some of those solutions in my subsequent companies, the CHROs. And I mean, it's unbelievable, right? That you can do some of these things. And I've gone on the circuit to share some of those previously as well, because it's not until you have some of those really transformational experiences that, you really are learning and growing, and you draw on that. And so it is important for you to have these tough experiences or big lifts, because they shape, your decision making, your approach. You learn from it. You don't do it all right, but you definitely dust yourself off. So anyway, a great, now great experience, but pretty tough going through, and again, a lot that I still draw on. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So a lot of similarities there. We talked about creating, fixing, driving impact, growth, vision, operations. Let's take a step back and talk about why that change was needed in the first place. Robyn, you touched on that a bit. Let's take a deeper dive. Why was the change? Why was the transformation required in the first place? What got those organizations there?
So it's an interesting question. I mean, the obvious, right? It literally, housing market there was a couple of impetuses to it. So clearly, the economic situation, the mortgage situation, everything. But the bigger question for me is, right, I came from a Fortune 500, pretty well-run company when I took the CHRO role. And I remember saying to the CEO and CFO, like, there's money pouring off the sides of the bus and the back of the bus. I saw so much inefficiencies and opportunities and things of that nature, right? And we had the model that we had, not unlike a lot of home builders, where you buy, a regional builder, and you bolt it on, and there's some synergies, but a lot of them remained local because it's a bit of a local market. But back to, it wasn't our fault that the housing market is a combination of factors clearly that drove it. But the question for me still today is, when I said, I see money pouring off the side and the back of the bus, and the response was, that's for a rainy day, and there's plenty to get in front of us. And so do you take the time to pivot to collect the money that you're oozing out the sides versus what you're foregoing in front of you? Because the fact is that it took us time to pivot, and you lose years versus, might you have started that slow transition? Do you really need 26 architecture departments? Might there have been some hub and spoke models so that you could have staved off a more inefficient model earlier? Same thing with homeowner services and things of that nature. And so again, different CEOs and boards will make those decisions, right? Because maybe the getting is so good, that you have to, make that hay when the sun is shining, and that rainy day fix will come. But you better, have money in the bank, because as we all know, if you drag your feet, you slow to change, it costs you years to recover, versus, just start the transformation incrementally versus big bang disruption. So I guess that's what I would add to mine. So thank you.
Others want to jump in?
I can go next. Ours was, really driven by, similar to Robyn, financial situation, right? I mean, we were in a financial kind of crisis for that region. But what was also happening around the same time, we started to, and this was back in about 2000, I think 13, 14, we started getting these micro organizing campaigns across the region. So our, as Eva mentioned, the way Pepsi is designed, you could have, a warehouse or a distribution facility that maybe has 15, 20 people, because it's servicing kind of in a hub and spoke model. And so as we started to dig into, not only are we having these like terrible financial results, but we now have these organizing campaigns, micro organizing campaigns that are happening. And as we sat down and, started to talk with the employees in our effort to try to stave off the vote for the union, we found out they weren't getting paid. So there were decisions that had been made for these very field sales driven, folks, right? Frontline sales folks in the organization, decisions that had been made in a time when business was booming. They had been put on 100% commission plans. So they were, doing great in the heyday of the business, but Pepsi's business had, gone through some tough years. People were being more healthy. People were not buying as much soda. They were shifting to, products that Pepsi was kind of chasing to keep up with, right? On the more health and wellness side of things. So our frontline sales force had been screaming to the leadership teams. They hadn't been listening. They hadn't gone deep enough to really understand that it was, a decision that had been made about their compensation years before some of these leaders were ever put in place. And so the moment that we started digging into that, talking to the employees, telling them, okay, we're going to fix this, not just because you're telling us you're going to vote a union in, but because it's the right thing to do. So we dug into that. We made all kinds of changes from a compensation standpoint. We did the right thing by our employees. The leaders started stepping up and actually listening to their employees and so forth. And that's what really made the difference. And that's, how we started that transformation. But you think about it, something kind of as small as a sales commission plan for a frontline sales force that can lead to a macro miss on the numbers, and the leadership team completely missing that because they didn't dig in and really get to the root cause of the problem. So crazy. We'll take that, as everybody else on the panel has said, so many lessons learned that I will never forget in my life. But my team knows that when they bring me a problem, I always force them to get to the root cause of the issue, because oftentimes, we're trying to focus on all this top level stuff. And sometimes it's like way down here for you to solve the problem.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Padma or Eva, do you want to jump in?
Sure. This was much more of a proactive transformation and getting the company ready. Was the largest pharmaceutical company, and it's hard, I feel that it's harder to stay on the top than reach the top. So when you're the largest pharmaceutical company and you're thinking about it, realizing I just can't do the same thing and try to do it faster. It's impossible. So that's one. The second one was the company had a very, very huge product that was going to lose exclusivity, Lipitor, $13 billion in revenue. So you just don't want to sit there and say, hey, let me look at the pipeline. Let me bring 5 more products in. That's not going to solve the problem. You really need to think about where my priorities are, right? So that was another reason. The third thing was, why did they start with oncology? If you look at any pharmaceutical company, oncology has the greatest impact on margin and stock price. And so being able to say, let me look at oncology, because the pipeline was fabulous and the products were not coming through to launch, they knew that there was something wrong, primarily right from development through launch. It's not about selling, and Pfizer predominantly was a sales company. So they knew that the science needed to get stronger, and oncology was extremely scientific oriented. You cannot be a sales company. So these were the reasons why they started. But at that point in time, one of the things that we couldn't share why we started, but now people say, aha, was once we finished the transformation of oncology business unit and 2 other business units, because this prototype was used, we announced the acquisition of Wyeth. So we were also, as a company, completely ready with the new operating model across all our therapeutic areas, right from development to loss of exclusivity. We knew how we wanted to do it. The integration of the acquisition by far was one of the fastest in Pfizer history.
Excellent. Excellent. Eva, do you want to chime in? And then I'm going to come to you with a question in the chat as well.
Well, I actually saw the question in the chat and I thought it was a beautiful way to answer both.
Perfect.
The chat question is something along the lines of example where you stood up to business as usual and what change or how did you drive change? And I love this idea, whether it's deeper listening, which Mandy was talking about. It's a crisis. Your business has gone from 6 to 1 billion and the economy has dropped, or to Padma's, the most difficult transition in any company, a $13 billion pipeline is going to change overnight. So I go back and I can use retail examples, Lacey, where there was a lot of conventional wisdom that I would go back and say the 5 whys. And I'll give you 3 examples. 1, high turnover is great. We're constantly replacing high-paid employees with lower-paid employees. We want 100% turnover in retail stores. That was a conventional wisdom. Another one was you must have a 4-year college degree to come out and be an associate store manager, so that eventually when you run a store, which could be 10 to 200 million, you have that background. Those are just 2. I have many others. The reality was when you use really good advanced analytics and deep listening, 100% of the college grads that we would hire for stores and the associate manager would turn over in the first 12 months. And I would challenge the assumption with data and say, this is not an aspirational job in the associate manager role, but it's an incredible aspirational role for a community college grad who then can access tuition aid and complete their degree if that's right for them. So we piloted some of these changes and we saw dramatic differences. The idea that 100% turnover is great for retail, and Mandy, you remember some of the retail operations metrics as many of us do, and we show that if you could drop turnover to 55% by deep listening, employee retention incentives, but particularly by investing in credentials and then promoting people based on it, that your store metrics improved dramatically, but more importantly, your client and customer experience improved, so your sales per hour improved. So some of the science of what we do in HR and human capital was missing based on old conventional wisdom that may or may not have been appropriate a decade earlier. So a lot of the skills transformation work we've all been doing shows in a high turnover economy, you have to solve creative problems when it's 12% turnover. Right now, the crisis is healthcare. So my friend Van Ton Quinlivan is the CEO of Futura Health. She was at the White House with me in 2010. She is tackling the lack of healthcare workers in the West with Kaiser and finding hidden workers who have core potential, need skills and credentialed skills in clinic time to meet a certain number of hours to fill all those open slots. So what's the answer here? What's the business as usual? Human capital metrics based on good data that are business first, solving unsolvable problems and questioning all old assumptions, and then piloting new things to show that people can acquire the skills. They may not need a 4-year degree, and ultimately their retention and their success can be higher than an old hiring model that was built 20 years ago. I never argue with success, and then celebrating and rewarding those fellows or those grads. Guild Education is doing it. Futuro Health is doing it. UpLimit is doing it. By the way, three of the three have female CEOs. And that's another thing is, are there underserved communities where have hidden talent? They just need a chance to be visible, show what they can do. Those are all challenging norms, and we've shown that they can work.
Absolutely. So those are really great examples of things at the organizational level, but there's a good question in the chat about the impact on the individual level. So it was mentioned that if you're slow to change, it could take years to catch up. How would that translate? What would you say is true at the individual level? That's a question from Linda.
So I'll chime in. I don't know that I know the answer, but I liken a large organization to a large ship, right? And turning the Titanic around takes a whole lot more inertia than individually. If you have decided you're resistant to change, and then you wake up one morning and say, I got to start drinking the Kool-Aid. So it starts with a natural curiosity and a will to change. And I think, so I don't think it's the same for individuals, but a collective, if you've built a culture where there is no change, then that inertia is going to be slow for you too, versus an organization that makes sure people understand in everyday life, our lives are changing at home or at school and in work. And so making sure the aptitude and the attitude and propensity to change is openness, because we do a disservice to our workforce, because we will obsolete them. I mean, I've seen it happen here, and this is my narrow skill set, and I've never had to diversify. And then we say, okay, it's time, and they can't, because they haven't. And so anyway, that's how I.
Padma, Mandy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can go ahead. I think the thoughts that are coming to my mind are maybe along a little bit different track, right? Because I think about how different people respond to change, right? I have a 17-year-old daughter who tells me all the time, like, Mom, I just don't like change. And I have a hard time understanding that, but it is who she is, right? And it's just a constant reminder in my everyday life that she is a very different personality than I am. And same thing goes for an entire organization. So I guess, what's really coming to mind for me when it comes to individual level change is, I think the one consistent thing is when people understand the why behind the change, they can, whether they're, admittedly resistant to change, or, someone who's more of a, on the cutting edge of change all the time. I think the more that you can help, but the organization can help the individual to understand the why behind it, and why why we've made 10,000 changes, right? I think about, my current situation at Shutterfly. We are also on a transformational journey. We're in a business turnaround at this time, right? Like we are, we had a very tough year last year. We've had to deliver a lot of really tough messages to the organization. And I've only been here for about a year, but in that time period, as we've become more transparent, more, understanding that people just want to know, I keep saying it over and over again, but why are you making these changes? Why are you doing this to me? Why is my life looking different? Why are you delivering this, tough message to me? That they can absolutely get on board a lot quicker. So I don't know. I think the question was, is it maybe bad to be slow to the change? I think we're all naturally a little different to adapt to whatever that change is going to be. But helping with that transparency, I think will help people bring people along on that journey with you.
Great. Padma, I'm going to come to you now with the next question. So we've talked a lot about learnings, and as we all know, it's important to learn from the times that we've stumbled as well. Talk to me about some of the obstacles you've had to overcome when you think about transformational change, and some of the learnings that have come from those obstacles and overcoming those barriers.
Absolutely. Don't assume that your current transformation or change that you're going through is going to be similar to the one before. Each one is very, very unique. And the reason it's very unique is because of people. And, one acquisition integration and another one, just because if it's the same industry, same kind, no, it doesn't happen. The goalpost is going to be different. Your starting point is different. It was a big lesson that I learned very early on in my life when I was a part of a deal team. I'd moved out of HR and I was with M&A and crunching the numbers. So when you crunch numbers, there's a lot of similarities on the back end. And you can look at trends and analysis and data, as Eva was talking about. They speak, they tell you a lot of stories, and you're translating them into stories. But when you go in front of people, and when it starts to relate to people, you'll have to have tremendous amount of context. That context has to turn into empathy, and that empathy has to turn into communication. And communication is not about frequency of communication, it's about consistency. I learned that simple difference was a huge learning. I thought I was extremely proud that I was giving milestone communications, etc. And someone sat there and said, but I don't know when to expect it. So I said, Friday, 2 p.m. Every Friday, 2 p.m., you'll get something from me, right? That makes a difference because they can go home and say, this is what I know. So very simple things like this. And, we all think about change strategies, methodologies, and tools, etc. They all work beautifully. And sometimes we make mistakes, but it is about the human element and creating context. The same change will look very different. Like example, COVID. We think about, okay, great. We're telling employees work from home. US, people were very happy. Singapore, people were annoyed. They live in 500 square foot home with 2 kids. So context really matters. So what is global as an organization? How do you localize something? So these were all many, many lessons. I have many other lessons. I've stumbled more than I've succeeded, but I'll pause here.
Yeah. Eva, let's come to you with the same question.
Well, I was actually thinking about the pandemic, Lacey, and I saw in the chat a little bit about when do you know to turn up the heat and turn down the heat. And I think we could combine both of these to say change that leaves people behind and they don't know the why, they don't know what to expect, and the uncertainty on top of it. Will I have a job? Where will I be? Who's my new boss? A lot of that level of change we saw during the pandemic, and we had to make instantaneous decisions, and they were survival. I can think of a retailer calling me on a Sunday saying, this pandemic isn't going away. I got 90,000 people who need a laptop, and the only training we can do is on a mobile. If we don't solve this by this date and turn my stores into pickup and drop off centers that are contactless, we will go out of business and we have this much cash. There's change that's self-initiated, and then there's change that's survival. And the individuals understood that as well, and we're waiting for the organization to signal it, but then it had to be activated. So I think the important thing is when it's that serious and severe, like Robyn, you were mentioning, a lot of times the folks are like, this ship is taking on water. We either got to bail out together or we're all going down. That's a lot of what the experience of the pandemic was. I think the stumble, Lacey, and we all share this now, is the extraordinary burden. Mental health and mental wellness, children and lost socialization time. We're seeing, as HR chiefs, things like medications that go to support anxiety-related conditions are increasing dramatically. So I'll go back to a simple principle that I think all of us have talked about is context is everything. How many times in the last week have we seen return to work, hybrid, dial it up, dial it down? In Singapore and in certain parts of the world, thank God we're all back. In other places with urban commutes that are reinstituted now, my goodness, this isn't working. Let me find somewhere else. So I think the stumble that I've seen, Lacey, and I've done it myself, is you're part of an executive team looking 1 to 5 years out. It's all obvious to you. You can't unlearn what you already know because you know the destination. Active listening with rigor and discipline and active communications And then something that warns you, like the sales comp design, Mandy, I lost my team. These guys haven't gotten paid more than 10% of what they earned. Got to stop, got to change, got to go back and own the mistake. And the final phrase I'll use, Lacey, of how I continue to try to recover is safe, you're seen, you're heard. And if I could add anything more to that, then I act and change, slow down if necessary, because I heard you and you gave me 2 or 3 alternatives and we can have a better outcome together. And I've done it thousands of times over 40 years. So I don't want to name any more than the ones I just gave you, but I'm happy to if someone wants details.
Excellent, excellent. Robyn, I'm going to come to you with a question from James. Do you believe in selecting champions of change to drive the momentum, be a role model for the change?
Most definitely. And there's the informal and the formal leaders in an organization. And, from the very onset is making sure you have line of sight to who they are. And then making a determination and tapping them and see if they'll be part of the change effort. And, bringing people in that are relatable is central to the transformation effort, so whether it's the why or whether it's, they're going to follow this individual more so than they might follow me. And so absolutely critical that you build out a network of change leaders, change influencers.
Mandy, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say even like just kind of building off of that, sometimes the folks who are the most resistant to the change, if you can turn them and then pull them in, make them part of that solution. It was, one of the tricks I learned very, very early on in kind of the manufacturing days, being an HR manager in a manufacturing plant, you'd have some of the most sort of callous, obstinate, just dig their feet in. This is how we've always done it. Nothing, nothing's going to change. And man, getting, 1 or 2 of them on our informal committee or, putting them kind of in charge of something was always a key to success. Because if the rest of the organization saw that person who was your biggest resistor could actually get on board, then, most people would follow.
Excellent. So one final question before we wrap up, and this is the doozy, right? What is the one thing you want to leave the group of people, the listeners today with? So what is that one piece of advice, that one tip, that one trick that hopefully they take with them as they lead? Padma, I'm coming to you first.
Didn't get time to think. Okay. Change is absolutely necessary. Everybody's afraid of change. Times when I've led change, so I have been afraid because I don't know if I'll deliver on the desired outcome. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that, because at the end of the day, how much ever success you deliver, if you don't touch the human element and put the human element first, it'll never sustain. And for me, that was my biggest lesson learned, to say, what is the human equation in this? And how do I make that human equation really sincere, really authentic? And for me, when I think about authenticity, it is alignment of the head, the heart, the act, and the speech, right? So what you think, what you say, how you feel, and how you act have to be aligned. Everybody's trying to read between the lines. And that has been really important. So that was my biggest takeaway, and I'd love to share with you.
Excellent. Yeah, change is hard. Eva, I'm coming to you.
It's the simplest question in the world, but no matter how dark and dire the situation you might find yourself in, I love to ask someone, what would great look like? And literally, I learned earlier today that it moves you from physically to a place of hope and generating possibility. And even if it's the third shift forklift driver who dreams of being on the day shift and doing plant administration, or it's the sales clerk who wants to be a store leader, or it's the technologist who wants to be on the AI team. If you know where people's hopes and dreams lie, and sometimes the bridge might be a bridge too far, but you can get them closer. CEOs who might imagine, I don't want to just return to 6 billion, Robyn. I want to be part of a coalition, and let's see if we can get to 12 by doing this very differently. So the longer I work, the simpler it gets. What would great look like?
Yeah, love it, love it. Mandy, you're up.
I guess I think that, one of the most important roles that we can play as HR leaders in our organizations is to help the organization to understand the magnitude of change, right? And how you can sort of pace the amount of change that is happening. And, I've been part of, like I said, so many turnaround situations where it is like the roof is on fire and you have to move just so quickly. So I get it. Like sometimes that's just not a reality to say, oh, we're going to slow this thing down. But I heard on a session earlier today, sometimes if you slow things down in the upfront and the planning process, you can really speed things up on the back end and the execution. And to me, it's the toughest challenge I think that we face as HR people, because we don't want to be the one, seen as the blocker or the one getting in the way of the change. But I think it's the most important balancing that we can do for our leaders is just to constantly remind them, you're, like Padma said, you're dealing with human beings here. And sometimes that change fatigue can be overwhelming, just too much piled at one time. So help balance your leaders when it comes to the overall picture of changing the organization.
Nice, nice. Robyn, wrap us up.
Okay, I guess what I would say is there's no reason for you to go it alone. I think, Eva, one of the reasons we came through the pandemic as well as we did is because the CHRO community, they came together and we guided our CEOs to most of the decisions because we had a collective. So put that one aside. If I think about, the DEI journey that I needed to take my company on, it was uncharted waters for me, terrifying, but there was no reason for me to be alone. I interviewed dozens of CHROs who were more than happy to avail themselves because I don't want to pay the dumb tax. I most definitely want to learn. And so don't feel like you have to go it alone, and build that network, early and often, and know that people want to help one another. So that's been hugely valuable to me, and it keeps me in this chair 20 years later, because it is lonely for CEOs and C-suites and people who are ahead of what they do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, the expertise and experience on this panel is more than I can put into words, which was amazing. And I'm left with just a quick recap of some of the things that I heard in those final pieces of advice. What would great look like? Change is hard. We're all humans and we don't need to go through it alone from a HR, human capital, or organizational perspective. All really great, brilliant stuff. And thank you so much, ladies, for sharing that information and knowledge and stories with us today. So really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, thank you. As we close out day 2, it's a reminder of where we've come from. We have heard from 24 speakers and panelists over the last 2 days. Tomorrow, we are back to hear from 10 additional speakers, and we'll start the day at 11 o'clock Eastern Time with a keynote around building strong culture in the hybrid work environment. Please, please, please make sure you join us, and thank you all so much for joining us today. Another excellent, great day of content, learning, and leadership. Have a great evening, and we'll see everybody back tomorrow.
Pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Lacey.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much for having us.